Welcome. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Arran Rogerson.
This conversation is being cross-posted to The Golden Shadow and The Artemisian. If you've been following along with mine and Arran's work, you might know that our podcast, The Golden Shadow, has been on hiatus. And in the interim, Arran and I have both been working on projects of our own, but also collaborating behind the scenes.
Our last episode of The Golden Shadow was how long ago? Like May of 2022?
Yes.
Has that actually been 2 years?
I think.
It might be 2 years since we did the last episode 69, Internal Family Systems. But yes, we both have solo projects that have allowed us to kind of go in the directions that are calling to us intuitively. And sometimes when doing Golden Shadow, there was a lot of overlap and good chemistry and coming together in really powerful, beautiful ways. Other times there were kind of clashes and stepping on each other's toes. And so there's 3 entities that exist now, which are Alyssa's solo project, which is the Artemisian. Mm-hmm. There's my solo project, which is the Torch, that is a little more recent than the Artemisian, kind of behind Alyssa in terms of my content. And then there's this third thing, which is our collaboration, which is the Golden Shadow, which was the podcast that ran between 2020 and 2022, I think only.
Yeah.
Either way, those 3 projects continue to exist, even though Golden Shadow has been kind of on hiatus. The creative work that Alyssa and I do is still very much active and alive behind the scenes, sort of informally.
Well, if you've been perceptive or if you've been paying attention, you'll know that we released a tarot ebook of definitions. Authored by Alyssa and Arran Rogerson.
Yeah. There were a few things.
There's a few things that have come out. And so our creative collaboration continues and we work very closely together. And this episode today is going to be exploring another one of our creations, the Alchemical Inner Work Guidebook.
So that was released last week?
Well, there was a soft launch for paid members of the Artemisian. So if you're a monthly member, you do get perks from time to time. But today marks the official launch of the guidebook.
Oh, sweet. Okay. So Alchemical Inner Work, if you haven't seen the guidebook already, if you haven't purchased it as a paid member, let's talk about that. What is Alchemical Inner Work?
Alchemical Inner Work is the brainchild of my own imagination, which really was born out of this desire and urge and intuition of how to make alchemy practical, how to take it out of this strange imaginal or theoretical sphere and really utilize it as a framework that the everyday person could use. And it was an issue that I wrestled with for a very long time as I studied and read about alchemy, mostly from both the Jungian and archetypal psychology perspective. And there's so much richness, just like other archetypal systems like tarot, mythology, things like that. There's this sense that there is this vast world of imaginal potential and psychological equivalence that exists within alchemy. It's why Jung, studied and wrote about it for, probably over like half of his life. Like he was so enamored of alchemy, so saw so much of his psychology and his ideas of individuation reflected in alchemical work. And I agree.
It was kind of a big focus for Jung towards the end of his career, right?
Yeah, it really kind of took hold and became this major focus for him. And we've got a whole episode on alchemy. So
right, and the whole idea of alchemy as being sort of a form of inner work is essentially comes from Jung for the most part, right? Like he just sort of originated the whole idea of that
as this analog to individuation, as a reflection of what he thought the process of psychological evolution and maturation and development is, he saw it in the principles and the ideas in the manuscripts of alchemy. And at the same time, there's also clearly these very pure, concentrated expressions of the collective unconscious in alchemical material in the manuscripts and in the emblems. So similar to kind of exploring mythology or fairy tales and saying, okay, wow, look at, how these themes keep recurring over time, over culture, and how that seems to link back to psychological principles. The same was true of alchemy, but I think in a way that was more striking and more meaningful, at least for Jung in this case.
So alchemical inner work can be thought of as a modality, right?
Yeah.
Something you can use therapeutically for self-work. You could even possibly use it with other people in conjunction with some sort of partner in which you do self-work with, some friend. You could, do readings for people potentially, I guess, if you were good with alchemical inner work. So it kind of works similarly to how tarot might work. It's like you can do it with yourself, for yourself.
Yeah.
When you wake up in the morning, something like that. You could also do it with a friend, and we're gonna demonstrate that today, I think.
Yep.
But as far as this method, this modality, alchemical inner work, how does it work? What's the method?
Yeah. The method is really based on what I would say are two major ideas, which is that we are reimagining our psychological dynamics as the alchemical prima materia. So that's the first matter. It's the items that were being taken into the alchemist lab and being worked upon, being subjected to experimentation. And so, rather than approaching our life and saying, oh, I have this depression that I just can't get out of, and, it makes me feel really lethargic and sad all day, you take that and you reimagine it symbolically as a prima materia. And then the other core part of the work is, well, once you've sort of settled on this idea of a symbol of your inner work of the prima materia, you operate on it, right? You take these different alchemical processes and you explore how you could develop the prima materia further. So it's a reimagining of our, struggles, our goals, our path of individuation through this alchemical framework.
And again, if you want more information on alchemy, you can look up our episodes from the Golden Shadow podcast. You can find those on YouTube or on Spotify. I think we did one episode that was just you and me talking. We also did an interview with
Anderson Todd.
That's a really great episode. That's a really good interview, which he kind of, the effect was like, kind of like the galaxy exploding meme in the head of just like, oh, whoa, like I get it now. Yeah. I get what you're talking about. I understand what you mean when we talk about alchemy. But so you can look those up for more information if you want to go really more in depth about what alchemy itself is or how you might think about it.
Yeah, I've also got a bunch of writing on alchemy on my Substack. Go to the directory of posts, hit the alchemy tag, and there are several articles which you can explore and, read and learn about the at least Jungian approach to alchemy.
But for our purposes today, essentially, you can think of alchemy as, in the way that we're using it with alchemical inner work, is there is some sort of crossing over from a kind of rationalist, practical perspective on your life, on doing self-work, and then diving into sort of an imaginal realm, just kind of trying to sort of work with the unconscious a little more intentionally.
Yeah.
And then after you've sort of worked with the unconscious, you kind of bring that result, that work, that those kind of changes inside you can kind of bring them back out into the practical, rational world again and apply them to your life. And so that's the idea. Alchemy is kind of bridging the gap between the external and the internal. Sort of like the physical and the imaginal, kind of like the rational and the irrational. Alchemy is essentially forming a bridge.
Yeah.
So what you do inside is reflected outside, as above, so below, etc. So we're going to try and demonstrate this practice live for you. Alyssa's going to go first, and she's going to sort of walk through what it might look like to engage in alchemical inner work for yourself. And after she goes, I'm going to go. Alyssa is the authority on this work, obviously, and I'm sort of the novice, and so she's going to help guide me through it. And yeah, shall we get started?
Yeah. So alchemical inner work is a 3-step technique, and it begins with identifying the pre-materia, right? Because the alchemist work always began with establishing, choosing, selecting something that they were going to experiment on. And so what this means for us in inner work framing is that we choose a struggle, an issue, a situation, something in our life that's really calling to us, got a lot of energy and intensity to it. And we describe it symbolically because the prima materia was both an intuitive concept and it had also this practical face to it. You know, like the item being experimented on might be lead. It might be some sort of organic matter, you know, like a tree branch, I don't know, a flower, whatever. But sometimes you read in manuscripts, you know, really strange things like it's a cloud or it's the maiden's milk or something like that. So clearly it was blending these realms between something that was practical or something that was like concrete and real, but then also had an imaginal symbolic counterpart. So that's what we're doing. We're taking something real in our lives and then we are establishing what its symbolic container or representation is.
So that's step one.
Step one.
Step two would be?
We're going to analyze the prima materia because, you know, alchemy is tactile, it's experiential, it's working with, you know, things in real life. And so what is the quality of this prima materia? What is its weight? What does it look like? What are its properties? All of that informs what you do with it. So we list a few attributes of this image or symbol that you've generated for your prima materia, and you list out the qualities. That's step 2.
Okay. And step 3? The final step?
Yeah. Then we work with the prima materia by choosing, selecting an alchemical operation. One of the interesting parts about alchemy is that there was some relative consistency in terms of the different processes that alchemists were doing. So you'll see, you know, repetition around the use of fire as calcinatio or, you know, dissolving a material in a solvent. So the solutio water operation, the killing of the material is mortificatio. So there are some established, you know, alchemical processes that we can work with. And in this case, based on the prima materia, its qualities, you choose an alchemical operation, and then you consider what its psychological or practical counterparts or applications are, right? We're going from the internal back to the external. We're creating that bridge, you know, from the deep unconscious back into the outer world.
And for our purposes, for the way that alchemical inner work, Alyssa's modality in particular, for our purposes, we have 14 operations to choose from.
Yeah.
That's not exhaustive in the world of alchemy.
Definitely not.
I think that there could be pretty much unlimited operations that you could come up with. But for this to work and be accessible and to be productive and useful, you need to reduce it down to something you can work with. In this case, we're choosing 14 different operations, and you can see all 14 of these in the guidebook.
Yeah.
They're listed out and they're explained. And so that's what we're working with.
Mm-hmm. So step 1 for me, what's going on? Struggle, issue of life. I need to identify what this main focus is. And for me currently, especially I'd say in the last 2 weeks or so, there's just been a lot of overwhelm. There's a lot going on. There's both this feeling of huge transitions going on in life in a general sense, like over the last 6 months and probably moving into the end of the year. But on top of that, there are factors of leaving to go on vacation and work projects that need to be done and feeling like I don't have time and going away for the weekend to my friend's property and a really big event happening next week. And it's just like this convergence of factors of overwhelm. It's not even burnout. It's just like I'm kind of losing it. And I'm noticing that there's this disproportionate reaction to it. Like, as Arn and I kind of lovingly call this experience, the doom spiral. Like, I'm like, oh God, I can't handle this. Everything's falling apart. What am I going to do? And so that's my current situation. It's the overwhelm.
Right. So that's the kind of practical, rational explanation of an issue or situation
Yep.
in your life that you are choosing. And the next part of step one
Yep.
is for you to tap into the imaginal realm
Yeah.
and to conjure up a symbol of some sort that you feel corresponds to the practical issue or encapsulates the issue in some sort of symbolic, mythological, possibly just sort of like dream image.
Yeah.
So you want to find a substance, prima materia.
Yeah. For me, this process is like closing my eyes and kind of dropping into what's sort of like an active imagination or this receptive meditative state where I allow that field of consciousness to dim. And as I'm holding this idea of the overwhelm in my mind, what symbol comes up? How would I describe this metaphorically? And the image that kind of just burst into my mind is I'm drowning. I'm drowning in the water, but I'm not on the surface. It's like, it's very clear. I feel like I'm sinking deeper and deeper into blackness. Like I'm in the trench. I'm not even anywhere close to the surface, gasping for breath. I am deep under the water. It's dark, it's inky, and there's this feeling of just going lower and lower. So that's the image, that's the symbol.
So it's interesting to note that, we're describing choosing your prima materia, and it almost might make you think that you're supposed to choose like an object, like very specifically.
Sure. Yeah.
Like my prima materia is like a star, or it's a tree, or it's a piece of junk. But in this case, you're describing what essentially is kind of like a scene.
Yeah, it's a scene.
An experience. So
Yeah.
it's an imaginal scene. It's an imaginal experience, but it's almost like a little snapshot that you might see inside like a crystal ball, like a vision of some sort. So like that's interesting to note that it could be that.
Yes. So yeah, point number one is like when we dip into the deeper layers of the psyche, it's how things are imaged to us. The way that a symbol is created is very rarely straightforward. It's, sometimes it is just like, it's a rose, it's a red rose, and it's just sitting there. But a lot of times it can be an impression of something. It's, the prima materia feels ethereal, like, the wind moving through the trees and I'm standing there watching it. Like it's a whole environment, or maybe it feels like music, or maybe it just feels like somatic impressions in the body. So there's all these different channels or ways that imagery might flow to you. And so take what comes, in the words of Marie Stein, whatever comes up, receive it. So I accept that it's sort of this rich environment as the prima materia.
Okay, so that's step one.
Yep.
You came up with a real situation in your life, or a collection of situations, an issue in your life.
Yep.
And then you conjured up a symbol, a prima materia that corresponds to that issue.
Yep.
Now, step two.
Step two.
So you're going to analyze your prima materia.
Yeah. So what I was drawn to was how black everything seemed around me. Although it was clear I was kind of in the ocean, or I'm in this great large body of water and that I'm drowning, the qualities that just seem to scream for my attention is the darkness. Like when you go so deep into the water that there's no more light and it's heavy, like the feeling of this image, the feeling of this symbol is like, if you were actually descending that deep into the water, your body would, I don't know, would it blow up in some way just from the pressure? I don't even know how to describe that. But it's so heavy that I'm just sinking deeper and deeper. And I know I'm drowning. I know that I'm in water, but the pervading feeling is death.
Okay.
It's kind of morbid, but that's what it is.
It's real.
Yeah.
So those are sort of the like attributes and qualities. You're just kind of trying to describe the prima materia more deep way. You're trying to kind of flesh out the details, sort of like to get in touch with the imaginal atmosphere sort of around the symbol or image.
Yeah.
And that's going to allow you to figure out what it needs, essentially, or how you might work on it. Right?
Yeah. The information that we need to both do the technique and to often to understand what it is inwardly that we're needing in our life is often contained within the images. But because we can approach them in such a one-dimensional way or a surface level way, we don't take into consideration all the nuances, the attributes, the qualities of what an image or a symbol is providing us. We might just jump to some sort of, interpretation of it, and that's it. So this is really encouraging being with the image and feeling it out, maybe even imagine like you're in that experience and noticing what comes up in your body, noticing what comes up emotionally. If you were to kind of touch, the water, like, does it feel fluid? Does it feel like there's a strong current moving you? In my case, there's a ton of density and this feeling of sinking that's happening. What we need to work further with this prima materia and thus our psychological contents are these qualities and these attributes. It's so full of so much rich information.
Okay, so you've chosen a prima materia, which is more or less you sort of drowning or sinking into darkness.
That's right.
You've analyzed it, which means you've kind of fleshed out the attributes. You've described its qualities. You've kind of explored the prima materia more deeply. Mm-hmm. And now we move on to the third and final step, which is to work upon the prima materia. And that requires Alyssa to choose an alchemical operation out of the 14 that are listed. Obviously, this requires Alyssa to have at least some understanding of what the operations mean. If you're coming to this completely new, you haven't looked at the guidebook at all, you've never heard anything like this, obviously you're going to feel a little disoriented by the operations because there's 14 of them and they can be kind of mysterious, maybe a little confusing as to what they refer to, but similar to if you've worked with tarot, for instance, it's like you have to kind of learn each card,
right?
And that can go on forever. I mean, there's so much depth that you can uncover in each card, but you still kind of need to know, like, the Five of Swords kind of means what?
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely.
That's true for the operations as well. So there's 14 alchemical, operations, and Alyssa, which ones are calling to you, or maybe just which one? Maybe exactly which one is calling to you.
This has come up a lot as I've practiced the technique and as I've taught it in class, that it seems very clear that the prima materia needs multiple operations, or that multiple are being implied. And so I think that we can kind of hold multiplicity or complexity, but generally it's really helpful to start with one. Kind of the qualities that seem the most intense or that pull your attention most, and then expand from there. And so what I'll say here is that there are elemental analogs in alchemy for the operations. So they actually match up to earth, air, fire, water. And so when you have these prima materia symbols that clearly have the elements at play, it's quite easy to jump to those operations. So the water one is called solutio. It's when you dissolve the material into a liquid solution. And so clearly me as the prima materia is being dissolved and sunk into this great body of water. And there's a lot about dissolving barriers, when solutio is present, about moving into a sense of fluidity, about submerging yourself into something greater. But I'm not saying there isn't anything good here to work with, but for me, it was the feeling of death that felt most salient to me. And in the 14 operations, that is represented by mortificatio, which is the dying or the killing of the material. This is both a kind of metaphorical operation, because clearly something like lead doesn't die. And yet, the alchemists sort of imagined that when they subjected it to certain processes, that it killed, the essence of that, lead, and it could be reborn. But maybe there were, some actual organic materials or who knows, small animals or something being worked with that actually died. So mortificatio, it's kind of one of these slightly abstract operations, but it's about that killing. It's about a process of death. And so that's my main operation that I'm working with.
Okay. Mortificatio.
Mortificatio. Yeah. I think, as you choose this operation, the next question that you ask yourself is, well, what are the psychological or practical applications? How do I take this idea that something within me requires a process of dying, and take that into real life where I'm feeling overwhelmed, where it feels like there's just too much going on? There are certain key phrases that I've provided in the guidebook. And one of the key ones from Mortificatio is letting go of the old self, or transformative sacrifice, or accepting that there are endings happening presently that are necessary. And so in addition to, the current moment where there's something major happening very, very soon. I've got a ton of work. I've got a trip coming up. Like, none of that has really to do with like endings. But I think in general, there is a deeper current of I am essentially on like a threshold of life where I feel like I'm leaving true kind of, youthfulness behind. I feel like I'm kind of on that edge of emerging into something really new in myself. Like, life is changing in so many different ways. And that kind of transformation and change is fundamentally destabilizing. And so I think there's a underlying feeling of destabilization, or an underlying feeling of things that are in a process of dying and being reborn. And then on top of that, you have all of these, situational dynamics that add on to it. So to me, practical application is really both the contemplation and the processing of how my life is changing, and how that brings with it this sense of fear, honestly. Change is pretty scary, even if it's something you want. A sense of like, I can't go back to where life was before. And although that's exciting and that's a good thing, it also brings with it some sadness or feelings of uncertainty. And my practical applications there is probably to really sit down and do some more intentional, focused inner work around those themes and those ideas, because I think I've been distracted by everything else. Planning, getting things booked, making sure all of my work projects are done, which are important, but underneath the surface, this deeper, more profound thing is really not being tended to. Like, I'm not at the gravesite, mourning and releasing and letting things go. A part of me is just kind of dying, and I'm not even paying attention to it. So this is me kind of tending to that dying process.
Okay.
Make sense?
Makes sense.
So that 3-step technique, can look really different for each person. So we are going to have Arran try this out. And I imagine that some different nuances are going to come up. And hopefully this will just provide a good insight into what this can look like for each person.
Yeah, hopefully this should be a good demonstration of alchemical inner work, because I'm a novice. So like most people who are going to be approaching this work, they don't really have much familiarity with the operations. They don't really know what they're doing. So Alyssa is going to guide me through it and help me figure out how to conjure up the prima material, how to explore it, and then definitely help me choose proper operation.
Mm-hmm.
So, step 1. Okay, so I need to choose an issue or situation, and something that is salient to me, or something that feels edgy. I think when you're doing this, you can kind of just sense like, what's the thing that really is occupying your mind the most. Sometimes it can be obvious. Other times you might need to dig. And there's a lot of options. I think what I'm going to go with right now is an injury that I sustained about 3.5 months ago. That was one of the most serious injuries that I've ever had. I've had a lot of injuries. I've been a serious athlete my entire life. I was very, very focused long distance runner for quite a long time. And I've moved into lots of different sports since then. But this most recent injury was a sprained ankle. And it was the kind where you actually partially tear ligaments in your ankle.
Yeah, it looked really scary.
Yeah, it was super swollen when it happened. It was really freaky. There was a loud popping sound when it happened. Like I was also just super painful, but like I immediately was just like, oh no, that was a really, really bad thing that just happened. Like I just fucked myself up basically, like real bad. And yeah, it's been 3.5 months, which is a long time for an injury to heal, and it's still not all the way better, but it's an issue for me. You know, obviously it's disruptive to my life, but it's mostly there's a recurring pattern of aging. You know, we're getting into our mid to late 30s now, and you know your body is changing. And for someone who is used to being a really powerful, capable athlete who can essentially use his body very freely and sort of like, you know, whatever his mind wants his body to do, the body will follow. And then you're transitioning into a situation where it's like your body is not following your mind anymore. It's like your mind is telling your body to do things and the body isn't fast enough or isn't strong enough anymore, or the body actually breaks, like you pushed it too hard. And so this is something that's been coming up for me since I turned 30, essentially, is like dealing with injuries that had never happened before. And this most recent one was pretty bad. So essentially, the issue is, how do I approach this injury? How do I prevent myself from getting injured again? This was bad enough that like I can't afford to do this again. Like I cannot injure myself this way. I have responsibilities. I cannot be immobilized. I can't be restricted to a bed or, you know, on crutches. Like I need to be able to be out in the world and working and moving around. So how do I approach this? Do I stop exercising completely? No, that's not a good answer. Do I stop sports entirely? I don't really like that either. I'm not that old. Like I should be able to continue to play sports in some form. But at the same time, it's like this can't happen again. So there needs to be some sort of balance. And I think a lot of that has to do with a lot of emotional work, spiritual work, of kind of accepting that you've aged and that you can't do what you used to do. And like, that's okay. That's what it means to get old. And so there's a lot of confusion around that emotionally. How do I approach this? You know, what's too much? What's too little? You know, you can't quit. You also can't keep going in the same way. So that's the issue.
Okay. So how would you describe this metaphorically? Or if you were allow a symbol or an image to be conjured up or to appear in the mind's eye, what do you see?
It's interesting because this is like a physical ailment. It's almost like it's easy to be like pretty literal about this, but I'm not going to fight it too much. There's kind of an imagery of like flying, sort of like moving through like this sort of like heavenly kind of cloudscape or something. There's sort of like the notion of like the imaginal me, which is some sort of like angelic warrior that's kind of like intuitive self-image of like a mythological version of me. And as I'm flying through the air, like I need to be watching over the world or doing what I do, there's some sort of like curse, plague, some kind of like magical dark sickness that is like latched onto my ankle. And perhaps it's pulling me down, or it's preventing me from being able to fly the way I need to fly. And it's as if I'm like losing control of my leg. It's like maybe like the curse has a mind of its own, like it's possessed or something.
Yeah.
But I'll just stop with that.
Okay. So step 2, analyze, hone in, focus on a few qualities or attributes of that scene that really stick out to you?
There's feelings of panic. There's feelings of weakness. Like a need to escape, almost like this like curse is like pulling me like down towards the nether realm or something like that.
Yeah.
Like below the clouds. It's like gonna like I'm gonna fall out of the sky, essentially.
Sure.
And there's even like this image of like, again, I have a history of like this sort of like self-image, like this mythological self-image. And so like this is not a completely new image, but there's kind of like this sort of angelic warrior, like I like dropped my sword basically or something like that. Like it's like falling through the clouds because of this. Like I'm just like stumbling and like I've dropped my blade, which like allows me to do what I need to do. I don't know, we're getting into like interesting like IFS work almost. But yeah, there's sort of like a dualism of sort of like the nether realm and like the higher realm, and like the higher realm is full of light, and I'm like trying to like stay in there and continue to be able and strong and heroic and fly and do the work I need to do. And there's kind of like this dark, stormy realm beneath, and like the cursed ankle is sort of like it's like tugging me down, almost like a arm pulling me, or like a chain that's kind of pulling me down to like this sort of like darkness underneath the clouds. And I'm like trying to fight to get out of it.
Okay. I have some ideas around step 3. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then you can kind of see how that seems to fit or resonate. And if there are any other ideas that come to your mind, we can explore that too. But at the very end there, you're kind of talking about like this chain that's connected to that dark nether region below the clouds. And there is a really striking alchemical emblem that shows this bird flying in the air, and then there's a chain connected to it, and it's chained on the other end to this frog. And so this is
a historical, real alchemical image. Okay.
It's interesting because it shows how these sort of spontaneous images or symbols that can come up inwardly are clearly ones that are, rooted in the collective unconscious, so that they appear in other areas too. And this sort of interplay between the grossness of earth, right? That, things fall apart, that we become sick, that we age, that we need food. It's like this, the corrupting nature of reality is something that is explored in alchemy through the earth element. It can both be something that's solidifying and structuring and creates roots, and at the same time gets us into this like full embodied experience of what it's like to be a human being on earth. I can get wounded. I need sleep. I have these things that need to be fulfilled within me. I am not this ethereal being who is ageless, who needs no rest, who needs no food or water. So there's this interesting interplay between these contrasting elements of earth and air, or, what is rooted in the ground and what is up in the sky and in the heavens, which often can kind of bring this feeling of the ethereal spirit realm, or something that's really high and beautiful and expansive and cannot be touched by what is on the earth. And so that really stands out to me, especially as these elements of the symbol that really kind of grab your attention. And what I'll say first and foremost is, the feeling of the angel on high is a very strong sublime audio image. That is the air element. That's the rising to new heights. That's when the material moves from that solid, structured, fixed state, and it moves straight from solid to gas, right? So like dry ice, right? It was this solid block, and suddenly now it's just, vaporizing away. And so there's something really interesting about that air element and what it does. What is it like to feel weightless? What is it like to feel untouchable? What is it like to explore expansive horizons and have perspective and to move with ease, nothing obstructing you when you're up in the clouds, right? It's just total zoomed out, open, expansive potential and freedom and lightness and spirit and all that kind of stuff, right? And yet, alchemy tells us, that which has become volatile or that which is up in the air eventually needs to come back down. And so it seems like you are being pulled down by something. In this case, that feels kind of like a disease or, some black demonic essence. Which I think from the perspective of the sublimated, ego, yeah, definitely it feels that way. But there's something to be learned or understood, or, maybe it's like you've lived so much in this space of that air element, of that sublimated element, that the earth element is catching up with you. So which element does, or which alchemical process does this seem to be calling to? To me, it seems like it's needing the complement of the earth element to pull you back down.
Coagulatio.
Which is coagulatio. Or tapping into maybe like current states and transitional states in that way. Coagulatio, yes, it as I said, it's sometimes looked at, especially, when you see an alchemist kind of, just going off on these, tangents of exploration, that it's like the earth element is corrupting. We don't like being here in physical form. Physical form dies. Physical form deteriorates. It rots. It ages. It withers away. And yet it's an important part of the dynamics of nature. So in some ways, in its kind of darker valence or in its shadowy ways, it doesn't feel good to us. At the same time, it makes things real, right? It makes you contend with reality as it is. It makes you establish that maybe there are new boundaries that you need to have in your life that you didn't have before when you were this sublimated being. So, what's going to happen with that when that angelic being does finally get back down to earth? It might be like, oh God, like I've got this wound now, but maybe also you find that you can approach reality in a new way that at least you're needing in the moment.
Yeah, that's good. That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm trying to conjure up imagery, like unfiltered.
Mm-hmm.
And, the thing that's unfiltered is essentially like what is the, strongest, most direct personality, like function, attitude, essentially, that like I live inside, and that's like introverted intuition, essentially. And, like that's very much like the thing I lead with, and it's very much up in the sky, and it is sort of like being with like this angel warrior, essentially. It's like this is kind of like what's real, and like this is who I am. I think it sounds kind of silly, like almost talking about it. Like there's almost like a little hint of like embarrassment of kind of like, well, of course you're not like an angel warrior, Arran. Like it almost makes it sound like I like think I'm like this badass, and like it's not. It's like it's really just like there's just like an inner being that I kind of lead with, of like something that's heroic and something that is fighting for good or something like that. But the the thing about like an introverted intuitive type is that there needs to be a balance with your sensation,
right?
The sensing
For
type.
sure.
It's like you need to find a way to also be grounded in the earth. And I think absolutely, if I was going to extrapolate some practical solutions from this operation like just now, and it's not new. It's like I've been through this before. It's like I understand this is true about me, and I need to like do better. It's like I need to be more in touch with kind of like the concrete reality of my life, and instead like there's a natural instinct to fly off into sort of like the intuitive realm of ideas and fantasy and philosophy and creativity. And I think as a young person, it's like I got away with, as you know, someone who is has a youthful body that's much more resilient. I kind of got away with just like being like an angelic warrior through my body as well. And I could just push myself super hard, and like, you know, I could win cross country races by like sheer will. I'm just kind of like push harder, like, you know, and like it would work out. But at a certain point as you age, it's like your body is not keeping up with you anymore. So what I'm experiencing essentially is a division between where my mind is taking me and where my body can go.
Yeah.
And going with that sort of intuitive mind, just like fly off into the cosmos, is like, it feels so good. It's so fun. And so being an athlete in that way of like, just go out and just like freely express your athletic prowess feels really, really good. But you can do it to the point where you injure yourself because you're being stupid.
Sure.
Where it's like, maybe you shouldn't be working out this much. Like, you're overdoing it. Your body can't handle this much work. It's getting tired. You know, maybe you cannot play this sport this hard because you're too old now to do that. Like, and especially if you're playing with kids younger than you, you know, if I'm in my late 30s and I'm playing with kids who are like in their early 20s, it's like, I can't actually keep up with them, even if I want to. Like, part of me is like, no, I'm like this immortal angel warrior who's forever 20 years old. It's like, no, you're not. You're actually like, you'll be 40 before you know it. And it's like, oh, do I really have to accept that? And it's like, yes, you do have to accept that because it's real.
Yeah. Can I read something really quick from the Alchemical Inner Work Guidebook?
Please.
This is the description of coagulatio. It says, that is coagulatio, compels us to engage with reality as it is rather than as we wish it to be. The experience of coagulatio is dense, anchoring us so we build a meaningful structure capable of supporting our new behavioral patterns, emotional outlooks, and ways of relating. So I feel like you're kind of coming to a lot of those conclusions through this discourse here, right? That it's like the earth element forces us, as like the sensate function does, to contend with reality as it is, not in this, you know, potential of it, not in the image of what it used to be. It says things change. You know, the body develops in ways that we don't always like, you know, we lose what we had before. So what do we do now that reality has changed? And the more that we continue to fight it and try to fly away, the more it'll probably try to pull us down more and more and more. And so, you know, the attitude towards probably not just this injury, but all potential injuries, or maybe just to exercise and athleticism in general, is to build this structure. This is where I think coagulatio can feel really resourceful. Is like, you know, what is the new approach of how I relate to this aspect of my life, of who I am as an athlete, of how I choose to exercise my body, given that I'm no longer 20 and a Division I runner and can, you know, do all these crazy things. You know, it makes you contend with what is present, what is real, what are the confines and limitations, because, you know, the nature of the earth element is it does fix, it does structure, it does limit, and that is something we want to break out of. At the same time, it also tells us, like, what do we have the capabilities for within those limitations?
So there you have it. Those were two examples of alchemical inner work in practice. I hope it's useful. I hope that makes sense. Obviously, there's an infinite world of how you could approach this, because there's an infinite set of issues you might have, infinite set of symbols you could conjure up in relation to those issues. And these 14 alchemical operations allow for a pretty vast landscape of how you might do some work on yourself.
Yeah. So the Alchemical Inner Work Guidebook is available. It'll be linked below if you're interested in checking it out. You can also grab the Alchemy Bundle through the store, which includes 2 classes, recordings of classes that I've taught on the technique. So if you want to be able to explore it in a more experiential way, get some background on the theory and ideas along with the guidebook, you can check out the bundle. And we hope you try it out and maybe leave some feedback and your thoughts about how it went for you.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.